Welcome to today's explainer. Okay, what if I told you that everything you think you know about being good at math is about to totally change? Today, we're fundamentally shifting how we approach mathematics. We aren't going to look at competitive math as just another academic subject you study for. No, we're treating it like a high-performance mental sport. Because honestly, just like physical athletics, conquering the Math Olympiad takes deliberate training, some serious strategy, and above all else, incredible mental stamina. All right, let's dive into our playbook for today. We're going to cover school math versus Olympiad math, why these Olympiads actually matter, how to navigate the Olympiad pipeline, what it means to train like a mathlete, and finally, how to avoid some really common preparation pitfalls.
Starting right off with Section 1, School Math versus Olympiad Math.
It is absolutely crucial we establish this right out of the gate. Getting an A in regular school math does not automatically mean you're going to dominate in the Olympiad arena. They are completely different games. Standard school math tests generally measure speed, memory, and how well you follow a very specific set of procedures. But competition math, that is a whole different beast. It demands serious patience and incredible creativity. You're getting hit with completely unfamiliar problems that you just can't solve by plugging numbers into a memorized formula. You really have to break it down and reason through the logic from first principles.
That's exactly why we say math is a marathon, not a sprint. And parents, listen up, because I really want you to hear this one. If your kid goes into competitive math treating it like a mad dash to find the answer, they are going to get so frustrated so fast. The answers simply aren't meant to come quickly. We absolutely must reframe their mindset early on. We want to focus on long-term endurance and getting comfortable just sitting with a really tough problem, instead of expecting an easy win.
Moving on to Section 2, why Math Olympiads matter. Before we get into the heavy training regimens, it's completely fair to ask, why put yourself through all this hard work? Well, the National Bureau of Economic Research actually found that students who participated in math competitions were significantly more likely to pursue STEM careers later in life. Getting involved early provides these incredibly foundational experiences. It inspires a long-term passion for things like engineering and computer science. Plus, let's be real, it gives students some of the most impressive credentials possible when it comes to competitive university admissions. But honestly, beyond just the academic payoff, the psychological growth happening here is massive. Yes, students naturally develop much higher-order problem-solving and critical thinking skills, but think about the emotional resilience they build. Learning to sit down and wrestle with a seemingly impossible problem builds a growth mindset and a really high tolerance for failure. And let me tell you, those are exactly the real-world skills that top-tier university programs demand from day one.
All right, Section 3, Navigating the Olympiad Pipeline.
A lot of people think the Math Olympiad is just one big test, but it's actually a multi-tiered pipeline that progresses from local qualifiers all the way up to the international stage. Let's look at the American mathematics competitions, the AMC track. You've got the entry-level AMC 8, and then it steps up to the AMC 10 and 12 for high schoolers. Now here is where it gets super interesting. On the AMC 10 and 12, students get 6 points for a correct answer, 0 for a wrong answer, and 1.5 points for leaving a question entirely blank. Yep, you are literally rewarded for doing nothing. It's completely by design to heavily discourage random guessing and stop kids from treating the test like a lottery ticket.
And you see a really similar pipeline structure globally. Take the Indian track, for example. The journey kicks off in September with the IOQM, which is mostly integer-based. Then Stage 2 hits, the RMO in November, and the game totally pivots. Suddenly, you have to write out rigorous, subjective proofs. From there, only a tiny elite fraction of students advance to the highly exclusive INMO, the training camps, and then finally, the absolute ultimate goal, landing a spot on the 6-member team for the International Mathematical Olympiad.
Section 4, Training like a mathlete. So how do we actually get a student ready for this intense level of competition? It basically comes down to explicitly training 4 core skills. First, pattern recognition, like instantly realizing that a word problem about handshakes is actually a geometry problem about triangles. Then, working backwards from the given answers. Third is case analysis, which just means breaking a massive, overwhelming problem into a few smaller, manageable chunks. And finally, sanity checks, knowing if an answer of 17 or 1700 makes logical sense before doing a bunch of heavy arithmetic. These skills pop up on literally every major contest, but they're almost never taught in a normal school week. You have to train them deliberately.
Now, while you're training, you also need to know the actual boundaries of the playing field. The core Olympiad syllabus focuses heavily on number theory,
algebra, geometry, and combinatorics. Notice what's totally missing here? Calculus. And statistics, too. While these competition problems are mind-bendingly difficult, they actually rely entirely on pre-calculus fundamentals. So parents and students, please don't rush into advanced calculus just to try and get ahead before you've absolutely mastered these 4 core areas.
Which brings us to a massive golden rule in this space. Spending 30 minutes struggling with one really hard problem builds way more mental stamina than flying through 10 easy problems in 10 minutes. Again, addressing the parents here, 20 to 30 minutes of daily, solo struggle with a single difficult problem is the absolute non-negotiable key to building Olympiad endurance. And that means no intervention. If you constantly step in to solve it for them the second they get stuck, they just learn to wait for someone else to fix their problems. You've got to let them wrestle with the unknown.
Finally, Section 5, Avoiding Common Preparation Pitfalls.
In traditional sports, we'd call this phase injury prevention. We need to talk about the traps that cause severe burnout, even for the most capable students out there. So let me ask you straight up, are you treating practice like a literal race? Because prioritizing speed over depth is the #1 reason students burn out or just flat out stop progressing in competitive math. Remember, speed wins school tests, depth wins Olympiads. The kid who races through 10 practice problems learns fundamentally less than the kid who patiently sits there and really dissects 2.
You really want to avoid a few specific traps. First up, skipping the written proof. As we saw with the advanced tiers like the USAMO or the Indian RMO, rigorous written proofs are strictly required. Doing the math in your head and just shouting out the answer, that's only half the battle. You have to write it out logically. Second, don't just study your favorite topics. You can't do geometry all day and completely ignore number theory because the tests will expose those gaps immediately. Third, do not use coaching centers as a substitute for solo thinking. A great coach guides you, sure, but the solo practice is absolutely mandatory. And lastly, stop pushing for immediate medals. It puts the completely wrong kind of pressure on young minds.
We're going to wrap up today's explainer with this thought. It is always a question of stamina, not speed. True mathematical mastery at the Olympiad level doesn't come from being the fastest human calculator in the room. It comes from having the patience and the sheer resilience to sit with the unknown, to struggle, and to eventually break through. So, my question to you is, are you ready to stop sprinting and start training for the marathon? Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive.